Hi, and welcome to the Handscape podcast. This is the first episode of the podcast. Finally, it's here. It took a little bit, took almost, I think, a month.
Has it been a month since you did the
Yeah,
first
since the first failure audio.
your prologue,
Yeah, the unexpected
your
prologue.
apology, right?
Yeah, it took a month, but you know, it's
Just
here.
it took a month to sit down and record this. Okay,
But it's here, and
well,
that's what matters, no? At the end.
right, right. Of course, I was quite funny in the one you recorded before because I'd had at least 5 or 6 cups of coffee by the time you pressed the record button. This time, I'm just dipping into my coffee now, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're going to be listening to this while driving, I recommend having coffee of your own, so you don't fall asleep at the wheel. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be well. We're going to probably speak for a couple of hours, and probably the format it will be slightly different. It will be less than a conversation and a little bit.
right? 'Cause you're gonna cut it. I assume people aren't gonna listen
Yes,
to me talk for 2 hours,
yeah.
pontificate for 2 hours.
Well, I'm looking now into the future. I don't know how it's going to be, but probably it will be good, and it will be more less than a conversation and more of a highlight of that conversation.
Highlights of the horrible crap that comes out of my mouth.
Oh, nonsense. Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
We're going to talk about different concepts here, and probably some of them are a little bit dense, and hopefully we can present them in a more playful way. But
Maybe the next time. Maybe next time after I've had several cups of coffee. This time it's going to be quite dry. I can feel my dryness, but you'll be there, and you could add a laugh track if you like. Add a laugh track to it. That way people know what to feel and when to feel it. That's important.
and fake laughs
Right.
also
Yeah,
maybe.
the fake laughs, the laugh track.
Oh, I'm thinking
That
about it.
that'll fix everything right there.
Well, I don't know how it's going to look
Don't
like.
worry.
But
Or we'll add music to tell you how to feel. An emotional. Yeah, I mean, just add a little bit of a little John Williams Symphony Orchestra behind it, and that'll spice it right up.
shall we start?
Yeah, whatever you want.
I love you.
I love you too.
So I would like to start with a little experience I had a couple of days ago when I was having a coffee with a dear friend. We were chatting and talking about what was going on in our lives, and there was a moment when she said something to me that I heard many many times before, and I'm sure that each of you have heard that before as well, and of course you have for sure. And she said, "You are so talented. I wish I was naturally creative like you." And let me see. I wish I could be as creative as you are. I'm quoting literally what she said to me. And naturally creative. That's what she said. And that part got stuck in my head for some reason because honestly I think is grown somehow. And well, I guess this is one of the aspects I would like to talk about today.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's a weak definition of creativity. Creativity is not a quality you possess, it's not an attribute. It's something you do rather than something you are. It's an action, it's a set of habits. It is the work. It is the work you put in. And as far as any one person's innate creativity goes, as long as we're talking about a human being, the human animal is the most marvelously creative animal around. And our capacity for providing life with context outstrips any other animal. And our capacity for language, thinking in sound and symbol, is also a fucking miracle. Our capacity for play and playful solutions to problems, both real and imagined. Whether you're speaking of the ancient ziggurat or the modern toilet, uh, that capacity for play and creativity uh, doesn't have a counterpart anywhere else in nature. You are, without a doubt, a fucking miracle. But we forget this. We take the daily triumph of sitting down on a porcelain shitter for granted, and we embrace this lie we have been told, and then make a habit of telling it to ourselves. And the lie is, I'm just not creative.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, I don't know, for example, if you were the kind of person that you always liked to draw since you were little, and that you were always kind of drawn into the artistic side of the world, you were always easily treated like the creative one in your family, or I don't know, inside your group of friends, for example. And it's funny because we always try, I think, we always tend to treat this kind of people as the other one, the gifted, or the genius who wrote this or that book, made this film, or I don't know, create that choreography. And we see it as something far away from us. And we like to tell ourselves that we are not arty, that we don't have that side on us. And I'm curious, what do you think? How do we arrive to this forgetting?
Well, we're conditioned out of it since age 2. Since around age 2. When we are children, we don't feel the need to justify play. A child instinctively plays. She instinctively moves from one interest to the next, one bit of world building in crayons, followed by a bit of world destroying in the open pantry, without fear or fetter or self doubt. And she begins to grow older. As she begins to grow older, her most commonly spoken words are questions. Why? How? What? She instinctively sees knowledge as a questioning act, much to the annoyance of those adults around her who are often short on answers. We call this period the terrible twos, as this little pain in the ass puts everything to analysis. And we adults struggle to get her to sit still, to be quiet, to play quietly, and to succumb to the inevitable answer of, because I say so. Because I say so, that's why. And soon the time comes for her to learn to sit in rows of desks and chairs alongside other children, as one of us adults tries to teach her all about the boundaries and restrictions and functions that make up our society, so that she can survive in it. And one of the first rules she often learns, unfortunately, is that play is for recess. And knowledge, which hitherto she'd engaged in discovering creatively and playfully, now knowledge is presented not as a set of questions, not as continually asking why, but as a set of answers that she needs to commit to memory, from one module to another. And once that idea begins to set in, she grows up compartmentalizing play alongside all the other modules that she's been told make up her mind, and is taught that joyfully engaging in it, without regard for its economic or social value, just engaging in play for play's sake is somehow a sin, and it's something that needs justifying. And once she learns that lesson, she becomes one of us. And play gradually recedes into the background as something that you do in your spare time.
Hold on, because you mentioned that knowledge is a questioning act. What do you mean with that?
Yeah, you know, much like creativity, it's important to understand that we do not possess knowledge. You know, we have a fairly mechanical view of the mind for quite a few different historical reasons. You know, we can blame Cartesian thought and a handful of dead Greeks that came before Descartes, I suppose. But we tend to see the mind as an empty vessel and knowledge as a set of objects we can hold and subsequently fill our empty minds with. You know, so for instance, here's a module for algebra. Put that in there. You know, here's another module for the history of the American Revolutionary War. Put that in there. You know, here's yet another module for trigonometry, for physics, and so on. As if each of these disciplines has a finite set of boundaries and is made up of a certain volume, and said volume can be placed internally once one has read a certain number of books and texts and passed a certain number of quizzes. One is then certified. Once the mind's all filled up in those slots, you know, first to a certain level, and we call that, you know, first you are a bachelor of this particular subject, then fill in a few more slots, and then you're a master, and then, you know, a few more slots, and with enough lack of ambition, you can be a doctor of a subject. But of course, none of these disciplines are finite. You know, their boundaries are constantly being pushed and expanded and retracted with daily questioning acts by those devoted to them, and accidentally by those who happen upon a discovery whilst engaged in another discipline. And as any school or professor worth a damn will teach you, the certification is meant to prepare you to ask better questions. It's simply for that. And to ask better questions than those who haven't read those texts or taken those quizzes. But the idea that I've studied this and been certified in that, so now I know it with a capital K, now this is a lie. Knowledge is not a noun. You know, it is precisely that process wherein we are in continuous search for better questions, so that we can arrive at a slightly less ignorant vision of life than we already have. Not a definitive vision of life. In our society, we imagine people as geniuses in order to absolve ourselves of the responsibility to continuously ask questions. We leave such questions to the geniuses and the specialists. We don't feel obligated to look through this set of questions they're currently asking. But there are no geniuses. There's simply you, and those who are a little more ignorant than you, and those who are often a shit ton less ignorant than you. Einstein, for example, you know, not a genius, but exponentially less stupid than I on matters of time and space. You know, because in a society that's become, I'm going to say, cowardly, where everyone pretends to a fashionable cynicism and a pretense of understanding, in that kind of society, those who deign to ask questions out loud are made to feel silly for doing so. You know, instead, to avoid such vulnerability, we're constantly spouting answers. We have answers for everything, very definitive ones, often that disregard established facts and evidence, you know, which is why for some particularly knowing and knowledgeable people, the world is most assuredly flat, and anyone who says otherwise is either a dupe or is in on the conspiracy. Because that's the world we've cultivated to keep ourselves, or to give ourselves, a false sense of security and control. And this is a handicap. Because as that same Einstein said, our intelligence is directly proportional to our capacity to be in wonder and awe of the world. and those who still feel there is more to learn, those who are without concrete answers, and those who are committed to asking questions, however vulnerable said questions might make them. Those are the ones who are in dialogue with the human record. They're the ones who are playfully engaging with those who are long dead and those who are not yet born. It is they who are creating. And 200 years from now, though perhaps long forgotten, the questions they asked will still matter. They will still matter. And everyone else who lived their life with their satisfactory answers, content with those answers, basically are just waiting in line to die.
Yes, sure. I think that each one of our discoveries not only affects ourselves and our self growth, but also it might affect to society too at some point in the future. I mean, what is clear is that all the time that we spend now exploring, asking questions, experimenting, and learning are not is not the time that you are losing. That's for sure. And we tend to think that big discoveries, for example, technology, or for example, the sewing machine. We tend to think that the sewing machine was invented by one person from the very beginning, and that's not true. I mean, the sewing machine was probably invented by a lot of people throughout many years, that these people individually experiment different areas, different aspects of that area, which one discovery led into another. The other guy picked it up and learned from that, and kept going, experimenting until the sewing machine was born. And what you discover now, it might change the world, and that's true.
Yeah, sure. We tend to think of things, new technologies, as if there was some teleological pull towards the final form of them. Because from the vantage point of history, we can look back on the past and see each of the various steps that happened that led to the invention of a thing. But in truth, a unique invention is often arrived at, a unique work of art is often arrived at with no final vision in mind. Rather, one bit of play leads to this discovery, while another bit of play leads to that discovery, and those two are eventually brought together and then thrown with another set of minor discoveries, each part of this elaborate menagerie of events coupled with a dozen failures for every single success. And finally, we have this or that final product, which is then often used in unexpected and unforeseen ways that no one imagined. Which is why play is so important. It's why scientists continually remind the public that experimentation is the root of discovery. Often aimless experimentation, because the answer to what do you hope to gain by sending a man to Mars is, of course, we have no idea. But through the process of trying to achieve this goal, trying to send some fellow to Mars, you can bet that our understanding of gravity and man-made photosynthesis and human sex in low gravity will be improved upon. Just as war tends to advance emergency trauma surgery and prosthetics, so too does random exploration tend to create equally random and entirely unforeseen discoveries. And exploration costs less than war. So there's your economic justification for it as the premier form of play.
Yes, true. We tend to think of technology, for example, as if it was an inevitable and pre-planned, and we look as play as something aimless.
Yeah, which is, ridiculous. The greatest inventions are generally the result of aimless play coupled with inspired ways to make use of the results. And the telephone for instance, which is the precursor to the system of cables and transmitters and antenna that are beaming this audio into your computer right now, was the direct result and is the direct result of many an aimless bit of play, each in dialogue with other aimless bits of play over time. First the air horn to transmit sound over larger distance, then the harnessing of electricity with all of its various trials and errors, then the notion of converting sound into electric impulses and telegraphed. And finally we arrive at the idea of transmitting voice back and forth in live conversation. Finally we arrive at the telephone. Okay, that's a process. It wasn't the design of one man. There is no single inventor of the telephone from nothing to something. It is part of a larger dialogue. And when we imagine it as something that was thought of beforehand, it's pretty goddamn silly. There are no masters. Again, genius is not something one is or becomes. It is a set of things one does. But this vision of mastery is old, and, again, also comes from many a dead Greek, like most of our fallacies, most of our best fallacies. And we have this notion of a learning cycle, of going from not knowing about a subject, not knowing how to play guitar, for instance, to learning how to play guitar, to being a master guitar player, an ideal form, radiating our knowledge of guitar, which is, of course, ridiculous. There are just two phases. There's just going from not knowing how to play guitar to learning guitar, exploring guitar. And, at some point you're making something sensible, but as anyone from Segovia to John Williams would tell you, they are always learning. The guitar player is always learning. The guitar is always teaching something new, just as with any other subject, from painting to plumbing. Bob Dylan's Times They Are Changin', while genius to us, was once just endless noise to his upstairs neighbor. It was just a screeching, horrible voice that sang the same damn chorus every evening, and I'm sure it was a horrible production. It was not an ideal form for said neighbor. But it's this notion that there is an ideal form of being something, that there is an ideal form of being this or that, and that's what we should be shooting for, that fucks us. Because those who push through this idea, they commit to a life of continually becoming, of learning as a continuous process from birth to death. And they generally become the men and women we style geniuses or masters, the professionals. And ironically, it's only the amateurs that have the idea of mastery as being a state of all-knowing or all-being, rather than a state of constantly working and becoming.
Yes, and in this case, the amateur, which by the way is a term that Steven Pressfield uses in one of his books called The War of Art, which I highly, highly recommend, and I will link it down below in case you're interested. And Steven defines amateur as the person that wants to be an artist but does not want to do the job, and gives up as soon as inconveniences show up. And linking this to what you were saying, the amateur use this as an excuse for not continuing to work on it, and he or she decides basically along the way that I'm not a master of this or that.
Yeah. It's easier to revere Jesus as a god and Gandhi as a saint than to courageously apply their rigorous habits to our daily lives. But such men are not asking for or interested in your belief for its own sake. And they are calling on you to make a habit of right action in your day. But to do so is to make yourself vulnerable. You know, we're far more comfortable and secure in revering the saint, you know, as we spend our day acting the asshole. And I bring up both of these men not to mock anyone's beliefs or any beliefs one might have about them, but because of the similar manner in which they went about their work, which I think is important. You know, both of them did so with a playfulness. It's easy to mistake for childishness in that they live their lives with a child's obstinate commitment to playing the game their way.
And just like a kid who knows that instinctively we, in order to progress and go on, we have to make ourselves vulnerable and continue to explore.
Yeah, I think we're being asked to do the courageous thing, to push through, and to make ourselves vulnerable to failure, and indeed to try and fail, and do so again and again and again, and to do it with a playful seriousness and a serious playfulness, so that it is a set of habits that we make our life around, rather than something we relegate to spare time.
If you are still here with us, thanks so much for listening. If you have any comments about the topics we talk about in these episodes, please do not hesitate to share with us. You can comment down below or send me an email, which way is easier for you. Also, if you want to keep track of future episodes, you can subscribe to my newsletter, and if you want, also you can follow me on Instagram, and we'll put the links down below. Thanks so much again for listening, and see you next time. Bye. Bye. Bye.
I see your curves and I feel your vibration. You dressed in black and white, you lost in the mall. I watch you disappear past Club Med Vacation. Another sleepless night, a sun that won't fall. I'll always be a dream.